Okay.
David, I just not sure what happened. Let me try and make you a co-host. Are you still co-host?
You can only have one user at a time with the license because we only have one license. So if there's two systems, if you log in with the same username on another system, then it will cancel the first one.
So what did I do here? Because it ended up shutting down.
I'm not sure if you did any. Did you launch it on another system?
I don't just I got logged out, so I went back in and
Ah,
started the meeting.
is it possible that somebody somewhere else is logging in, but the computer is logged in as the Yardley Borough account instead of their own personal Zoom? So it overrode this meeting, and you know what I mean?
Oh, so what do I mean, nobody else is logged in.
Nobody else, like anyone from the borough might be like on a borough computer.
Um, Not that I know of. I know Paul is not going to be here,
Paul's
so
not, and there's no possibility Paul might be like logging in or something.
no, I just got bumped out, so that's why I
Right.
logged back in. But
That was weird. Yeah, because that's the only way that would happen.
oh,
But
okay. It said so. Now is David. David, are you still co-host? Let's see.
I don't think he's back yet.
Oh, hold
maybe it
on.
was, yeah.
He
I
said
was gonna say
he's
maybe it was David because
David said he's waiting.
He's back now.
he's back. Okay. We'll figure it out.
Okay. Um.
It's actually been remarkably smooth all the time we've done this, so that's good.
That's good.
He's back.
Right.
I'm back.
So, David, I think that if two people log in with the same account, because one license, what just happened would happen, but we don't know how that might have happened.
Yeah, I don't know who would be logging in on the other account.
Right.
Hey, David, I'm going to
Hopefully it
do
won't happen
the
again.
host, or do you want to be the co-host?
Either one.
All right. I'll make you a co-host, so that way I can still let people in. All right, there you go. I think you're the co-host.
I am.
Let me know when you want me to start. I paused the recording. Actually,
Yeah.
you know what? It's recording now because I got bumped out. So,
All right, let me just do a quick glance. Do we have everyone we need? All right, I think we do. All right, let's try this again. It is 7:34, and I will call this meeting of the Yardley Borough Council to order. I'm going to mute everybody temporarily, and please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Marianne, if you could unmute yourself and do our roll call.
Sure. Ms. Thompson,
Present.
Ms. Siegel Morris,
Present.
Mr. Ross,
Here.
Mr. Bria,
Here?
Mr. McCann,
Here.
Mr. Barry,
Present.
and Mr. Feiner.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, 7 council members are present. That constitutes a quorum. I would like to just note for the record that Mayor Harding contacted me a little while ago to indicate that he would not be able to make it to tonight's meeting. All right, with that, we will move on to community announcements. One announcement I do want to make is that the borough will now be accepting applications for Code Enforcement Appeals Board. This is something we need to have in place. There are a few requirements. I believe, in terms of you must live or work in the borough in order to apply for that, similar to the Human Relations Commission. So we are accepting applications for that. Residents are encouraged to apply. One additional announcement is that Parks and Recreation has decided to cancel both of the races that were scheduled for later this year. They had been rescheduled once due to COVID, and due to the ongoing situation, have decided to cancel those altogether. At this time, if any other members of council have an item they'd like to share as a community announcement, please chime in and do so. And I see John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention as we kick off the fundraising efforts for the Mary Yardley Footbridge, the Friends website and the tab to donate directly to the bridge is operational now. And the direct link to the site is fodc.org/Yardley-footbridge. So I'll say it one more time, fodc.org/Yardley-footbridge. A lot more information. You'll be seeing more of the pamphlet signs as we kick off this fundraiser, but that's operational now, and a good way to support that project. Go to that website, easy enough to donate. So thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Susan may want to follow up on that. I see her hand.
Yes, Susan, if you want to unmute yourself and chime in there.
Okay. Actually, I was going to chime in about something else. The Yardley the Way We Were signs will be up until August 2nd. So if you haven't walked around town to look at photographs of what we look like, usually about the early 19th century, please do so. Because now's your opportunity, and it will get cooler. It has to get cooler. Thanks.
We all hope so anyway. Thank you. Anything else for community announcements? All right, seeing and hearing none, we will move on to public comment. This is the portion of the meeting when members of the public may address council regarding items that do not appear on our agenda. If you wish to discuss an item that does appear on the agenda, you will be given an opportunity to do so during council's consideration of that item. Members of the public are required to state their name and address before addressing council. And again, since we are in our Zoom format, if you wish to be recognized, please go to, if you are joining us through your computer, which it looks like most of you are, hitting the participants tab at the bottom, you will then find a raise hand button there. If you are on a phone, I believe you can activate that by hitting *9. So do we have any public comment this evening? All right, Mr. Gudati. You may have to unmute. There you go.
Just took a second. Just a quick question. I understand that there'll be a zoning board meeting coming up relatively soon. Will the agenda be published for that so that we are aware of what may be there? And I haven't seen anything yet, so I'm not sure what's on that agenda.
Yes, we can make sure the agenda is published. Notice has to be given anyhow, so that information is public. So we'll make sure it's posted. I believe there were going to be 4. I believe there are now 3 cases that will be heard. So we'll make sure that information is published.
And where will that be published?
I guess the easiest way we can do it is to post to our Borough Facebook account. So I'll make a note to follow up on that.
And those who do not have a Facebook account, can that just be printed out and put on a billboard out front? Patty?
We can do that too. Or certainly if you just want to shoot one of us an email, we can get it to you that way.
Or we can maybe put it on the website.
There may be others who want to look at it as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll make a note to make sure that we get that posted in a few places then. right, do we have any other public comment tonight? All right, going once, going twice. Seeing none, we will move on with the agenda. Next item is consideration of the consent agenda dated today, which is July 21st. There are 4 items on this consent agenda, which are approval of the minutes from last time, approval of today's bills list, approval of a certificate of appropriateness, 20-19, which is a fence at 69 South Main Street. The final item is for 3 appointments. I'll list all those individually. First is Aquila Montvillate, who is applying for the Human Relations Commission. Second is also to the Human Relations Commission, Christopher Campolone. And third is to the EAC, Alexander Mahmood. Would any member of council like an item of the consent agenda to be considered separately?
No, but David, there's 2 minutes, right? There's a special meeting minutes as well as.
Oh, yes. You know what, Ryan, thank you. That is, they're both listed under item A. The first is from the special meeting on the 30th, and the second is from the regular meeting, July 7th. That's my mistake. Correct. All right, so hearing none, do we have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I'll motion.
Second.
All right, the motion was made by Mr. Barry, seconded by Ms. Thompson. Are there any questions or concerns from council or the public? All right, hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries 7-0. Our next item is report from Chief Kelly.
Good evening, Mr. President. Tonight, I only have one item. There's no updates, but we are moving forward on Auxiliary Police Force Ordinance number 483. When we last met at last meeting, we voted to adopt. The council unanimously approved the motion to advertise this ordinance, and now it's in form and ready to be voted on tonight. By way of review, the auxiliary police, if this is passed, will assist the regular police force for emergencies or activities deemed necessary when called upon by the borough. The primary duty of the auxiliary police officers will be to supplement control at traffics, parades, police emergency, automobile accidents, wires down, and any type of other special details where we draw a crowd in the borough. They'll receive assignments from the regular police department through me to my designees. And by way of background, real quickly, not to take up too much time, but auxiliary police units have a history going back to World War II in the civil defense program and have evolved since that time through the generations into more of an emergency management function. So I respectfully request that council consider adopting Borough Ordinance number 483, which would establish an auxiliary police program.
All right, thank you, Chief, for that overview. So at this time, I'll ask, is there a motion to adopt the ordinance number 483?
So moved.
Second.
All right, the motion was made by Ms. Siebel Morris and seconded by Mr. Barry. First, we'll begin. Are there any comments or discussion from council on the ordinance? All right, hearing none, we'll move to the public, and I see Ms. Perlmutter has her hand up. So if you unmute yourself, go ahead.
Hi, I have a couple comments. This is adding 12 auxiliary officers, kind of a big deal. And I read the ordinance, and it was copied word for word from another borough. The problem is that there's been significant changes after COVID-19 and the violent protests that have been going on. And what I read in the ordinance, the proposed ordinance, it stated that members of the auxiliary police unit on active duty will have the same powers as regular police officers of the Yardley Borough Police Department. So I assume that means that Yardley Borough will be liable for the 12 auxiliary officers. And what I was concerned about is if anyone did a risk assessment to see what the perceived liability exposure is. If anybody's done a written opinion from the Yardley Borough Insurance underwriters, because we may be incurring more costs. It's very hard to get insurance right now, specifically for crowd control, for this type of thing. And I'm not sure if you looked into what the liability will be. I mean, are we insuring the officers, because they won't be able to get their own insurance for something like this? So I think that's like a very important thing. It may even outweigh the cost effectiveness of just having part-time officers or giving overtime to our officers. The other thing is there are expenses associated with this when I read the ordinance. And sometimes people think volunteer is cheaper. Sometimes it's not. I mean, expenses like training, PPE equipment, uniforms, radios, the officer's time, the chief's time to organize all of this, even the time for the fundraising portion should be factored in. So again, I understand, and the training is really significant, because under typical circumstances, crowd control training for crosswalks and traffic, for parades, would not be an issue. But things have changed significantly. Officers are, being attacked and assaulted, and the whole BLM protests were caused by improperly trained police. So there's a lot of issues here. It's kind of a big thing. So I was just wondering if anybody looked into the liability for Yardley Borough in terms of insurance. Who's insuring all of these officers?
All right, thank you, Ms. Perlmutter. Would any member of council or chief want to follow up on that? If not, we'll continue.
Quickly, if we're talking about just insurance, we do have a police liability plan that we fill out a survey for each year. Each year it asks if we have auxiliary police officers, so I know that when we notify our carrier, it will be included and they will be covered by that.
I mean, shouldn't that be looked into prior to the vote? I mean, because of what's going on, it may be very expensive right now. I just would, wouldn't want, I have nothing against the auxiliary police. I think it's a good idea. I'm just concerned that you're going to put volunteers in a situation that the borough may end up being financially responsible for. And it's just worth sort of checking into prior to passing this.
Thank you, Ms. Perlmutter. Next, I see Ms. Taylor's hand is up.
Will background checks be done on these people?
Yes, ma'am, they have to be. Anybody that enters our building, including our professional staff that works up front that has access to the police department, has to undergo thorough background investigation.
Thank you.
So David, I'm just kind of following up on that point. I think an interesting point was raised about the insurance. Is that something that could raise in a significant manner our insurance policy? Does anyone have any idea on that one?
We can follow up with Pete Toft and get an answer for you.
Okay.
My assumption would be no, because these are commonplace throughout policing throughout the country.
I wonder if Chief Kelly, if you could maybe just give us a few words about, this is obviously a commonplace thing, like you just said. What's the experience been like in other small boroughs, towns that have done a similar thing?
From the people, a few of the people I talked to, they haven't had they've had to disband their programs because they haven't had the volunteer interest. I know that won't be the case here because we've had volunteers helping us with a variety of other things. But again, this program goes back to the early 1940s, and some of these programs throughout the municipalities, counties, and states have gone continuously from the early 1940s to today through evolving. And these programs are usually very successful. I know Tullytown has just passed one and started one, and I've been working with Chief Doyle on that. I believe he did address the insurance question, so I can get an answer from both him and Mr. Toff on an exact number prior to implementation or advertising of any positions.
Thank you. And also, if there was, let's say, you know, a protest, a police protest,
Mhm.
would you? I assume you'd provide training to auxiliary police so as not to get into the types of situations that maybe the actual, you know, police would be involved in.
That's correct. They are not meant to supplement, or they're meant to supplement at non-emergency conditions. They were not meant to be put in harm's way because they are not armed and they will not have handcuffs and anything like that. So this is pretty much to assist at our parades or large events with large public gatherings such as Harvest Day and other public gatherings. It's more of a force multiplier than it is for them. They're not intended to perform primary police functions.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, that was the point that I was going to bring up too. As I have understood it, we have the full discretion to apply these auxiliary police to the events that we want. They're not going to be showing up for a 9 to 5 duty every day or anything like that, right, Chief?
Correct. And they'll be clearly distinguishable. Their shirts will be high visibility with reflection. They'll have their own patches on them, so they will be clearly visible as auxiliary police officers. You will not mix them up with our uniforms.
So can I just ask one other thing? If you do have protests, so you're saying they won't be at those? Because I don't know if people would distinguish.
I didn't say that, ma'am. What I said is they will not perform the duties and functions of a regular police officer.
But they'd be identified as officers, so the people would not understand the difference necessarily.
I'm not sure how that is if it says, if their shirts are a different color and they're clearly identifiable as auxiliary police officers. I just spoke to that, ma'am.
Well, my point is that.
Perlmutter, we already acknowledged you.
No, I'm not done. Please don't silence me.
You were already acknowledged for comment. This is the Robert's Rules of Order. I'm sorry, Perlmutter, I'm muting you. We are moving on. You've already been acknowledged for comment. There is a decorum that we need to follow in these meetings.
I
know we're in a virtual
valuable question. Why won't you let me just ask my question?
Perlmutter.
Just because you don't like it doesn't mean I can't ask it.
Ms. Perlmutter.
It'll be very quick. I'm sure it's an important point. You have auxiliary officers wearing uniforms.
The question was asked and answered. I'm going to ask you to stop or I'm going to remove you.
Not distinguish between auxiliary or not. If it says police, they're going to see police. That's important. I think it's extremely important when you have officers being assaulted and attacked. So if you have volunteers wearing a uniform, whether it's yellow or blue, it's going to say police on it, and the people are not going to distinguish. So I think that maybe they should not be used for certain activities that are more problematic.
Thank you for your comment. With that, I'm going to call the question.
I actually had a question I was going to ask.
Go ahead, Ryan.
After Caroline. So Chief, how do you expect to appoint these 12 auxiliary police? Will they be sort of annually appointed or appointed as needed? Or will you just appoint 12 and?
It's up to 12. We don't expect to get that many. We expect this to be a small handful. Let me look. They will be appointed initially. And I think there was, now that you mentioned it, I have to go back into the ordinance, but I believe there is something about reappointment. But I'm certain that they serve at the pleasure of the borough.
So they'll be permanent to an extent. They won't just come together as needed. There's going to be a set of people.
Correct. Because we are legally obligated to train them. So we will be seeing them each and every month for training.
Okay, thanks.
All right, are there any final follow-ups from council before we call a vote?
I had a question just about assumption of risk. So if they're performing their duties and they're injured, or is there some type of assumption of risk form that they sign, or is this something that, the borough will be liable for?
I'll defer to Bucky on that.
Yeah, they're going to be serving, even though they're volunteers, they're essentially serving on behalf of the borough. So the borough's going to assume, to the extent there is any issues of liability, it's going to be, assumed by the borough, not the individuals.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any final follow-ups? All right, hearing none, I will call a question. All those in favor of adoption of ordinance number 483, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions?
I'm going to abstain. I was thinking of applying.
Understood. So with that, the motion carries with 6 in favor and with Mr. Ross abstaining. All right, Chief, any other items for your report?
That's all I have tonight, sir.
All right, thank you, Chief Kelly. Moving on to our engineer's report.
Hi there, can everybody hear me? Great. Okay, in regards to the general updates, I don't have anything different than the report that was submitted in your packets. The only thing we have to do under this portion is to approve the final release for ML7, which was sent to Paula earlier today, and I'm not sure if any of you saw that. Did anybody? Okay.
We did receive it, but yeah, later in the day.
Okay, good. So then I will just kind of speak to that briefly. So this is the 4th and final release associated with the ML7 parking lot expansion. It would be in the amount of $38,579.45. And this would be the last bit that we need to do to close this project out and be done with it. So, yep.
All right, so we need a motion for that, correct?
Correct.
All right, so do we hear such a motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion for the ML7 release.
Second.
All right, motion was made by Mr. Ross, seconded by Ms. Thompson for the final ML7 release. Is there any discussion from council? Any discussion from the public? All right, hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, hearing none, the motion carries 7-0.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll just need the signatures and then we can send that along. So just make sure that Paul gets that. And then unless anybody has any questions with regards to the items that are in the general updates, we can move on to projects. All right, moving on to projects. So Main and Afton intersection. Barry had a conversation with Derek, our transportation engineer, and they were able to come to the conclusion that an advanced pedestrian phase should adequately address the concerns that we have in regards to ensuring that there is a little bit more protection for pedestrians wanting to cross that intersection, especially with the right-hand turn and other things going on. And now that we kind of got over that hump of the Green Light Go funds, reopening the permit to change this phasing is not something that we're concerned about. So Derek was able to kind of put together a brief little estimate of that. And basically he was able to say that this would be an additional cost of no more than $2,500 to kind of reopen the permit and do the back and forth with PennDOT to redo the signal phasing. And then that could just be instituted once the MassDOT comes in, and instead of having to change things up at a later date, we could just do it all at once. And additionally, I also took the time to kind of ask Derek more about the flashing yellow, because there had been some questions previously about it, and I didn't know enough to adequately answer, and the mayor had asked me about it not too long ago. So if anybody is interested, I could speak a little bit more about what you can expect to see with that flashing yellow, or we can save that for another meeting. Kind of depends on what you guys are feeling.
So thank you. And I'd like to just follow up because I had the conversation with Derek, which was very helpful because after talking to him, it seems like a great solution to the problem of pedestrians being endangered while vehicles are turning, because the lead pedestrian interval is proven to work in that it gets the pedestrians into the crosswalk before the cars turn so they see them. And because we're redoing the whole thing now, it makes a lot of sense to have this be part of the launch of the intersection instead of having to reopen the whole thing later, readjust the timing, change the traffic pattern, and then have people digest the change. So to me, this is like a no-brainer and a very low cost for what we gain from it. So I support this, and I would love to. I assume we need a motion to approve that.
Yes.
I would like to make that happen tonight, if other council people are on board.
Yep, so we would need you all to make a motion to approve the additional cost, and then we would add that on to the change of scope that was previously mentioned at the last council meeting, and then we will formally submit that to you guys for your review and approval at the next council meeting. But once you approve this aspect of it, we can get Derek right on it, which I would prefer, just because the master arm's supposed to come in the next 2 weeks. And so we want to get the ball rolling with PennDOT.
Thank you.
Great. Is there an estimate to the cost increase?
Yes, 2,500, no more.
That's a DNE.
Yes.
I'll make a motion to approve reopening the permit, adjusting the phasing, and receiving PennDOT approval for the Green Light Go intersection project, not to exceed $2,500.
I'll second it.
Motion was made by Mr. Hoffman, seconded by Mr. Ross, the close third by Mr. Feiner. Is there any discussion from council? Any discussion or questions from the public? All right, hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, hearing none, the motion carries 7-0.
Wonderful. We'll get right on that then. Next, we've got the Mary Arley Bridge replacement. So I do have an update after the report was submitted. I finally got a call back from DEP about our pre-application meeting, and they basically said that our project was pretty straightforward. They didn't think that we needed to have a formal sit-down pre-app, and they approved us to move forward with a GP11 permit. So we'll continue forward with that, which is great. So the design team is just about done. We're working through the grading, and we're hoping to be able to submit permits for in early to mid-August. So I'll keep you guys posted on all of that, but things are looking good. And then lastly, we've got the Pico property. I checked in with Paul about this earlier today. We still haven't received their updated appraisal. Paula said she was going to try and reach out to them tomorrow, and I'm going to reach out to the grant coordinators because I want to make sure that we're not jeopardizing them considering us for that, because right now we're kind of in this limbo where we had an estimated budget that we submitted initially while we were waiting for the appraisal to come through, and now that we have the appraisal, we have to update that budget. But we were hoping that when we submitted in the new budget, we could also include documentation from Pico stating their intent and willingness to sell the property, which would make our application stronger. But yeah, I don't want us to get booted because we're waiting too long. So hopefully we will hear from them soon, but otherwise I plan to resubmit everything before the end of the month, just so that we're not jeopardizing our application, regardless of if we get anything back from them. And then into North Main, sidewalk phase 2. Nothing really new. We're in the process of putting together the formal proposal to move forward with this design work. I spoke with our infrastructure lead at the end of last week, and he's seemed very confident that we will be able to meet the deadline of having final design by the end of September to support our DCED MTF grant so that we can have a shovel-ready project. So that's moving along at a good speed as well. And then lastly, in the ongoing grant funding opportunities, I attended the Reading Ave committee meeting last night to sort of explain the opportunity with the GTRP grant and the planning component of it. At the end of the meeting, it was kind of decided by the committee that they wanted to get a little bit of feedback from the grant coordinators about whether or not they thought with Reading Ave being such a small piece of land, if it was going to be competitive in this process. I reached out to them today, but I was not able to get in touch with anyone. However, this is the last council meeting before the application is due. So my recommendation is that perhaps a motion be passed to allow us to do the application should I receive positive feedback from the grant coordinator that it is a worthwhile and competitive project. If they say that it's not, then we don't move forward with this at this time. But if they do, I think helping Reading Ave get to a place where they have at least a cost estimate and some figures that even if we are not awarded this grant, they can use for other grant opportunities in the future.
Are the previous grant award winners public? Can we look them up somehow?
Some of the grants are really good about posting that on their websites. I haven't noticed that for GTRP, but could certainly try and look further into that. Normally the grant people are pretty good about getting back to us. It's just that right now with COVID, it all goes to this one central voicemail, and then eventually somebody calls you back. There's just not as direct contact as there used to be. So I feel very confident that I will hear back from somebody before the end of the week. And we definitely have the time to wait for me to start working on the exhibits until next week and still meet the 31st deadline. I'm not concerned about that timing.
So I chatted at length with a member of Parks and Rec who attended the meeting last night, and she had 3 main points that I thought were worth sharing with the wider council. The first is that committee does have purview over our open space or our Parks and Rec, and they have in-house talent there that can write grants similar to how the EAC handled their grant application. So if they had more notice, or perhaps if we wanted to do this next year, that would be a possibility and a cost savings. Also, she questions how competitive this landlocked parcel that's not suitable for walking trails or true recreation would be in this application. And then third, whether or not we could leverage some Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts in completing some cleanup projects or any other types of projects that we want to do it in that space rather than spending borough funds there. So I thought all of those points were very valid and wanted to share them with you all as we discuss this.
So I should say I attended the committee meeting. I didn't vote, but the vote was 3 to 1, with that Parks member voting against. And she expressed those viewpoints, and I think everyone understood that. And we really want to know if we're competitive, and that's why I'm going to make a motion that's contingent on that after discussions with the grant coordinator. But the reason the committee recommended this grant is because they do now feel that it applies after understanding it a little better. They feel like this effort will be reusable in the future, even if it weren't awarded. So it's not going to be a waste, and we can reuse it not only for future grants, but also just for our own purposes. And the outcome of this grant, if we were to get it, is exactly what the committee feels it needs, which is really good planning, inventory analysis, a concept plan, findings and studies and maps and everything you need before you go and do some work. So that's why they voted for it. So I'll go ahead, if I can, David, and make my motion.
Go ahead.
So the motion is, if the engineer receives positive feedback from the grant coordinators, council approves the engineer to put together an application and the required exhibits not to exceed $2,200, which is in the Reading Ave committee's budget, in services, and $100 for the application fee to submit the GTRP 2020 grant for the Reading Ave property concept plan.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second it.
All right. Motion was made by Mr. Barry, seconded by Ms. Siegel Morris. We will now open it up for questions or comments. We'll start with council.
Yeah, I had a question. So what is the overall goal? What would be, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but can you speak to it a little bit more?
Yeah,
Funds
absolutely.
used for?
So the GTRP grant not only covers parks and general recreation, construction, and rehab projects, but also planning. So with a planning project, you would be able to create a public participation component where you have a public meeting, you get feedback from local residents, and you really figure out like what are people hoping that this could be, and trying to kind of discern through that process what would be the best use. And then there would be a formal site analysis and inventory, maps created, things like that, and then a concept plan with a cost estimate associated with that would pull out the engineering service fees and the construction so that you can move on to the next phase of the project. So basically this grant application is to receive funding for that planning process. So eventually if they were awarded the grant, then Reading Ave would also have to cover the 15% match, which we're not expecting to exceed $1,000 because it is a tiny parcel. The overall planning for this should be about $8,000 to $10,000, but we would create a formal cost estimate of that to be submitted with this grant application, which could then be used for other grant opportunities.
Ryan, can you speak to, since you're in the committee meetings, what is the committee's end goal then with the property? Other than, what could it be used for? Is there any sense of that?
Well, that's sort of where they're at. I mean, obviously they want to clean it up. I mean, that's a simple thing that we can probably do as a community, but what do they want to do with it and what can be done with it? I mean, that's
what
we're
this would do.
struggling with. They need a plan. And you know, I don't want to speak for what they think it can become, but you know, I think
that's what I was going to just ask you, just because it would be nice to have, I have no idea beyond just cleaning it up, what it could actually be. It'd be real nice to just, for us to understand at least some possibilities, not that they would even be interested, but.
Well, clean it up, you have to define what that means. I mean, it's going to be probably pulling out vegetation that's not wanted, putting in vegetation that is wanted in a thoughtful way. I mean, maybe clearing a path in the future for a sidewalk, maybe putting a trail. See, I don't know, and there might be disagreements. But at the end of the day, having it to be, you know, beautiful, but also somewhat useful. Obviously, it's passive property, but be useful in the sense that maybe people can walk along it or walk in it. And
I see. So the idea is just to keep it as a buffer, but maybe kind of work around the edges a little bit, or do something like sort of minor changes to kind of make it a little more pretty, or maybe a little more useful. The general purpose is essentially it's a buffer.
It's a buffer, but you know, what is planted there and what's not planted there, what can be planted there, what should be planted there. Those are all things that need to be decided.
So my understanding from public comment at a meeting quite some time ago is that there's before we can do anything with the land, there's a issue with water retention and mosquito infestation. So can this planning cover remediation of that?
Yeah, that
Yep,
was, I
that would
neglected
definitely
that part.
get included. Yeah, so that would
I
definitely.
just, our grant application, we'd like to plan for backfilling this 0.91 acre property. I just, it doesn't sound catchy to me, guys. I don't know.
No, that's a big part. Can you speak to that, Liz, about the water
Yeah,
situation?
sure. So for me, when I was thinking about what this application would look like, it mostly would be focused on the aspect that, community members rallied to create, like, get the conservation easement instead of it being developed. So now you have this open space that has been preserved. And now they're trying to figure out what the best use of it is for and to make it usable. So this planning process, when you do the site inventory and the overall analysis, would take into consideration some of those drainage issues and give you ideas about how to treat them. Maybe a rain garden gets to be put in, so it helps treat that issue to water quality, and rain gardens can be very beautiful if you do them well. So to me, when it comes to these grants, they have quotas to fill when it comes to small cap, mid cap, and large cap projects. I think this is a perfect little cap project where you're looking to see what is the best use of this, and going through a formal planning process where you have somebody there to guide you through the possible routes that this could go can really give you the direction that people might need, especially if there's a lot of disparate opinions about how it could be utilized.
And we would obviously study the water issue, because I know near Chris's house, it's a pond essentially.
All right, I'm gonna move this along a little. So any other, from council at least, any final comments, questions, concerns?
I have one question before we can finish this up. So am I to understand that this grant has a possibility, if awarded, for like 8,000 to 10,000?
That's what I expect that we will be asking for. The grant can go up to $250,000, but there's no need for that in this particular case. So the rough estimate that I was able to pull together in trying to encourage applying for this is that the actual planning services associated with creating the concept plan and the public involvement would amount to about $10,000 or less, and that's what we would be asking for from this grant.
Okay, and then the rough cost estimate was it 2,200 or 2,500 to prepare the grant?
$2,200 for the services to prepare the application. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, I see Ms. Taylor has had her hand up for a while. Was that in regards to this item?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
First of all, what does DCRP stand for?
GTRP it is Green Recreation Trails Program. Yeah.
And the money comes from?
CFA. So
And what is that?
It's state funding.
It's really disconcerting when people talk in acronyms,
Sorry, I apologize. There's a lot of acronyms when it comes to the different regulators and the different grants and things.
I absolutely know that, but it's always helpful.
Commonwealth Financing Authority of PA.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
My other comment is, so far I've heard $22,500 to prepare the grant, $10,000 to essentially do it, what I would term maybe a touchy-feely, oh, what does the community want? To ultimately, I believe in Ryan's word, come up with a plan for passive recreation on a plot that isn't quite so vulnerable to water retention and looks prettier. To me, that's a whole lot of money to spend to come up with that outcome. Maybe it would be helpful to look at this a little more pragmatically and to look into other ways of accomplishing this, as Ms. Thompson stated.
Thank you. I see Mr. Chalice has raised his hand.
Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I'm on the Reading Avenue Committee, and unfortunately, I missed the meeting last night. I don't have the experience applying for grants the way the council does, and so my comments might be not entirely appropriate, but it seems to me that in order to apply for this grant, which is really set up to be done on larger pieces of land and for public recreational purposes, it's going to cost an amount of money equal to what the borough had budgeted originally to put toward dressing up the woods a little bit. And when a year ago, or a year and a half ago, when we were applying for the Pico Green Grant, that's why I matched what the borough wanted to put in, so that we'd parlay this up into about a $10,000 fund to be able to get some beautifying and regularizing influences into the woods. And as it stands right now, you're going to possibly spend that amount of money that the borough appropriated simply to apply for a grant that we don't know that we'll get. I think the suggestion was made to ascertain whether or not we have a very good chance of getting this grant, in which case it wouldn't seem to make much difference spending the money on that if they're willing to come across and help us fund this. But I have misgivings about spending that large an amount of money simply to apply for a grant for a project that we could probably handle within the borough. And as it is tomorrow, there's a gentleman coming, Brian Welsh, and whoever else is around. We're going to meet him at 12:15 near the Reading Woods. The gentleman coming who is a professional arborist, and we're looking for advice from this person as well. And I was sort of hoping that we could get in the locality talent to help us do a project and kind of keep it on the simple side. So all of you who have experience with grants will make a surer judgment than I probably am capable of, because it's outside of my field. But I would be careful that we don't waste the money on applying for a grant and then we don't get it and the money's gone. And then when the fall comes, if and when PICO has the green grant process again, then we don't have the money to put toward that. So I just hope that the money goes toward producing some results and not, bureaucratic kind of paperwork. Thank you. I won't take any more of your time.
Can I make a comment back to what John brought up, if that's okay? So one of the things that we talked about last night was that at the end of this process with regards to creating the exhibits needed for the grant application, all of those materials would be turned over to the committee. So they would get our Word document that put together the narrative, they would get our Excel file that put together the cost estimate, and they would get the maps that were created as well that could then be utilized for things like the PICO grant in the fall or for other grant opportunities in the future. So even if you don't get this grant, that money still produced some things that will be able to be utilized. So it wouldn't be a total loss, but I understand what you're saying.
All right. I'll ask for any closing comments before we go to a vote. I see Mr. Gudati. Go ahead.
It's the product that you would produce on the engineering side. do any of those particular articles or pieces of paper have expirations on them? So that the grant would say, if you wanted to utilize this information, it must not be more than 6 months old?
Typically, we have to do that with cost estimates just because of inflation. But once a cost estimate is created, there are books out there that give you the inflation rates that can help you readjust them. So once you guys have the Excel file, it could be kind of more on your end to do things, and you wouldn't have to utilize this for the next round of grant applications if that's how you want. But at this point in time, it seems like the first time that the committee applied for PICO, their package wasn't super formalized and maybe didn't help make it competitive. Whereas if you have a formal engineer estimate and figures and things like that, it can help make your package stronger. But I definitely understand if you have the in-house talent to take care of this, then by all means. I just wanted to make sure that it was understood that this particular grant does apply to Reading Ave and what is needed to move it forward. Whereas before it seemed like there was some miscommunication in that this was only for large projects and only for land acquisition. And that is just not the case for the Greening Trails and Recreation Program grant.
My concern was only that we would produce a product that would have an expiration date, or its components may have an expiration date, and we have to redo it all over again because we didn't apply.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just the cost estimate would be the one that you would have to worry about. The rest of the things that we would produce would definitely be usable.
Right. And no appraisals have to be no older than 6 months old?
Yeah, but we're not dealing with an appraisal at this point in time. But yeah, Tom might be able to speak more to how long cost estimates are good for. I know that when we prepare them, we usually have some sort of a note at the end of them of like, this is good through so and so. Tom, is there a typical time frame we would give for a grant estimate, since those are pretty high level?
Yeah, at this point, yeah, for something like a planning grant, you usually figure a year. You go a little high, your contingency up a little bit of conservative. So you're probably good for a year. And after that, you would just have to update it based on the current economic conditions. So it's not a major thing to update cost estimates at any particular time. It's pretty easy, actually. So.
But there would be a cost associated with those updates.
Depends on how elaborate it is. I mean, if you really got down, if you're doing tremendous amount of upgrades, I would say yes. A normal cost estimate can normally be updated in half an hour if you're not changing anything or adding anything. So.
Okay. Thank you.
It would be very helpful. I appreciate the point that John Bachalis, Mr. Bachalis brought up regarding, what we actually want to do with this. I mean, there was a very strong community interest a few years back, which I was in support of, to preserve it. And what I don't have a good, clear sense of, would be really helpful we have two committee members here, is, what does the committee think we should do here? I think that would, because like you have the Mary Yardley Bridge Committee, or the group that of residents in the area that went so far as to raise money to fix it. So that's very clear. Here, I think it would help us just to know, what's your vision? Because then we could say, well, sure, 2,200, no big deal, because we're going to probably get this grant or another grant and help the vision happen, as opposed to just get a grant in case we need it. Where are we in that spectrum? Maybe the two of you could give us some insight.
Who are you asking, Ori?
I'm trying to get a sense of what the committee wants us to do.
The committee wants to apply for the grant to, at the end of the day, have a plan to be able to then hit the ground running. Eventually, the committee is going to want to apply for a grant, and this one's available, and so I recommended this one because it's applicable and it's within the scope of having a plan at the end of the day, which will entail things I mentioned earlier. I don't think there's an overarching vision, but to preserve the open space and to make it as usable as possible and as useful as possible, and as the water issues taken care of, and to get out some vegetation that shouldn't be there and put in some meaningful vegetation that should be there. That's
Okay,
what
so
I
it's just basically figuring out the details, but essentially it sounds like that's the general thing you want to get done.
Yeah, to
And if
have a
we get
plan.
this grant, you'll do it. And if not, we'll apply for another grant and eventually we'll be able to do that.
If not, maybe we apply for another grant. Everyone thinks that maybe we should use in-house talent, but the in-house talent hasn't necessarily stepped up. Hasn't come to committee meetings. So, realistically, if people are willing to put forth their expertise and come up with a plan that makes sense and spend the time, that would be great. But I personally haven't seen that.
Right.
So this will get that, and it's within the budget.
Understood. Mr. Kavanaugh, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Councilman Bria. I am a committee member, and as I sat out here during the meeting, I've seen 4 people, members of the community, walk by. And one of the things that, when we talked about working towards improving this, is to kind of allow for some room for the community to safely go down the road, as you have to pardon me, as cars go by quickly down Reading Avenue here. To cut down, to create some room for people to safely walk, to improve habitat, to remove some non-native species, to thin out trees that may be non-native. We're all overarching, and at the same time, do it in a way that keeps the integrity of the forest, the woods, the wooded area, for the animals that live in there, and for the enjoyment and benefit of the committee. So none of us on the committee are grant writers, and truly we would accept any help. None of us are arborists. We are lucky that some people are stepping up. We'd love to do everything we can with the most cost-effective way, but the committee thought this was an effective way to move forward with the plan. And hopefully, even if we fall short of the grant, take this plan and apply it to further grants so we can further our vision. Thanks for allowing me time to speak.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to move us along. I see there are some other hands up. I'm going to be consistent. Earlier in this meeting, I asked the resident not to speak because they had already spoken once on an issue, so I'm going to apply that across. So members of council, if there are any final words, let's have them now, and then I will call the final vote.
Yeah, I'll just chime in with, looking at the cost benefit in here and the passive use of the property. No disrespect to the work of the committee. They're doing fine work in beautifying this project and having visions. And for me, the kind of goal is a little murky right now. And, there's a danger of not getting the grant. So for me, that was kind of telling. And like I said, I think maybe there are some ways that we can continue to work with members of the community and maybe even arborists and things like that I know we have in town to kind of help out with this project in maybe smaller steps. But that's just my point of view, and I do appreciate the work of the committee, though. Just wanted to say it takes a lot for people to get together and talk about making it a better place, but the cost benefit for me isn't there.
All right, thank you, Mr. McCann. Any others from council?
Yeah, I'll just quickly echo John that I really, think the committee is doing great work, but the cost benefit analysis, I don't think is there between the grant cost and then the possible match. It can come to between 30 and 50% of what the grant could be. So I just don't see it, but I think the committee's doing a great job and should really get a firm idea of what they want and move towards that.
Just to follow up, the match would be covered by the donation by Mr. Bachalis.
All right, I'm going to move on and call the vote now. Got the sense that this is going to split. So Marianne, could you do a roll call vote for us on this issue?
Sure. Do you want to state the motion again, just for my benefit as much as everybody else's?
Yes, so actually I forgotten who even made and seconded the motion, but this was essentially for the approval of, I believe it was up to $2,200 to prepare a grant application.
Yes, it was made by Mr. Barry and seconded by Ms. Siegel Morris.
Yeah, and the contingency is if the engineer receives positive feedback from the grant coordinator.
Okay. So Ms. Thompson,
Nay.
Ms. Siegel Morris,
Aye.
Mr. Ross,
Nay.
Mr. Bria,
Nay.
Mr. McCann,
Yay.
Mr. Barry,
Aye.
and Mr. Finer.
Aye.
So we have 4 nays and 3 yeses, so it fails.
All right, motion does not carry. Thank you, everyone. We are still, I believe we're in the middle of project updates still for our agenda. Back to Liz, I believe, is where we are.
And that was it. That was the end. I did make sure to make that the last item to discuss. So I'm all done.
Okay, so before we go on, I'll just one more time, if there are any final questions for Liz on any project updates, now would be the time. Otherwise, we're going to move on with the agenda. Right. Hearing none, we will move over to item 10, which is our manager's report. We have Ms. Sargent tonight.
Okay. Hi guys, I'm filling in for Paula because she's not here. Her daughter's graduating, so we have third quarter trash bills have been out and payments are coming in. Let's see, the office is handling delinquents for per capita and business privilege taxes before they go to Berkheimer. We are working on cleaning out the closet that's upstairs with old files, and that'll be on future agenda to approve. And that's about it for her.
Do we have any questions regarding manager's report? All right, moving on to solicitor, Mr. Klosser.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I only have one item for consideration tonight, and that's the borrowing ordinance that we discussed at the last meeting. It has been properly advertised and is now proper for consideration by council. And just to summarize, this would essentially accept the proposal from First National Bank of Newtown for a $500,000 essentially line of credit drawdown loan for various projects in the borough. There would be a 1-year draw period. Principal payments would start in year 2, but in a small amount, and then follow in larger amounts thereafter for 5 years. And the interest rate would be fixed at 1.7%. So if council is inclined to move forward, we would do the necessary steps to close on the loan.
All right, thank you. So we do need a motion tonight, and this is correct adoption of the ordinance. Would anyone like to make such a motion?
I'll motion to adopt ordinance number 484.
Second.
All right, that motion was made by Ms. Thompson, seconded by Ms. Siegel Morris. We will start with council. Are there any questions or concerns or comments?
My only concern is we're nitpicking over applying for a grant, and then we're gonna take out a possible loan of $500,000. So I just don't know, like, what the goals are here as council. Are we looking to get funding from the state to have the community help, or are we just gonna take out money from the bank and pay back over time? It just doesn't make sense that we're not going to support applying for a grant, but we're going to support drawing from a note. So just
So most all grants on our big projects are reimbursement based, like phase 1 of the sidewalk project. So in order for us to have the capital to pay the contractors on the next phase of the project, we need to have cash in hand. And then that money would be reimbursed back through a grant that we might receive. So this enables us to move on grant opportunities. And in this, we are looking at those bigger projects for this, the sidewalk, improvements to Borough Hall, Mary Yardley Bridge. We have no intention, as we have discussed at the past meetings, of drawing anywhere near $500,000. That's just the cap of the line of credit. Like a credit card, you have a cap of how much you can draw.
Yeah. I think this is these issues, just to respond also, the way I see it is these two things are very different. I mean, I supported in the end, the grant application, although I think the sense there is it the borderline thing that I think we're all grappling with. Is it worth the money versus doing it ourselves? And maybe with a clearer vision, it will still happen. But this to me is about long-term capital planning, and in a small borough with big projects and limited ability to raise money each year, we need to have a multi-year focus. And to me, this provides us an ability to move money around beyond just the year-to-year point, as many of these projects span multiple years. So I think it's a very different thing, Ryan. That's at least how I view it.
I just want to add one more thing too, that I think is a strong supporter of this. When our interest rates on our savings accounts rebound, which we hope will be in 2 years by the time we're repaying this, our savings account interest rates are higher than the interest rate on this line of credit. So we'd be making more on our savings than we're paying on the loan, if that makes sense.
No, I get it. It's just we have to submit grants for the sidewalk still. We consistently get denied, and it costs just as much to apply for that than it does the Reading Ave property. But all right, that I just wanted to know where our priorities were.
Any other comments from council on the ordinance? All right, we'll now move to comments from the public. I see Ms. Perlmutter has a hand up.
Yes, the last time I heard about this, it was 300,000. How did it become, I'm not sure how it became 500,000. The other thing is the legal notice that appeared in the Bucks County Courier Times on July 15th. It stated that the full proposed text of the ordinance is available for review online at yardleyborough.com. It wasn't available for review. It wasn't posted. The only thing that was posted was the same ad that appeared in the newspaper. I haven't had a chance to see it, and I'm requesting that the vote be suspended until proper notification with complete documentation is given. I mean, this is a pretty big thing also for the town of Yardley. It's a big amount of money, and I really would have liked to have seen the ordinance, which was supposed to be posted on the website, and it wasn't.
Thank you, Ms. Perlmutter. I'll respond to both points. The first, I did just look at our minutes from last time. 500,000 was the amount that was discussed at the previous meeting. You know, as for the posting, I confess that I do not check the website to see what is up there on a daily basis. However, all of our documents of this nature are available at Borough Hall, as I know you are aware, having requested the auxiliary police ordinance and having received it. You know, these are available for review. Are there any other questions?
Does it? I mean, there may be a legal issue. Is there a legal issue, Mr. Cosser?
No, I believe the notice that you referred to also indicated that the ordinance was available if you called Borough Hall and requested it.
It said a physical copy. Well, I guess my point is things aren't being posted, and this is a pretty important thing when you're borrowing that amount of money, and it just seems a little shady that you're not posting it so that other people can see. I mean, there's no reason why it shouldn't be on the website or the Facebook page. I mean, everything else is on the Facebook page, menus and flowers. I mean, why wouldn't something this important for the town be posted?
David, can I chime in just because I didn't get a chance to speak and I was trying to chime in earlier on this issue? And I know we had said at last council meeting, there was an agreement that the initial draw was 50 and we were going to revote if anything was drawn above that. So that's a safeguard there. And secondly, just kind of bring back the point about the grant and denial and the differences here. I mean, there's some really important capital projects being done, one of which we're raising money. The Mary Yarley Bridge, we're going into the community because we don't have funds in the borough to pay for it. And like I said, I think the difference there, if there was more of a clear goal, I would have supported the grant application and there was a chance of being denied. The cost benefit wasn't there for me personally, but I see this as necessary in getting some of these big projects. Borough Hall, which is really in need of some vital repairs, needs to get done. The sidewalk project, which we invested a lot of money in, I feel like it's a necessity, and those things are clear. And like I said, that's kind of where I see this. And I agree with Caroline that, you know, this money and this, I mean, we had a really good discussion last council meeting, not to muddy the waters, but it seemed like we all had a pretty good consensus and vision of this ordinance, regardless of the last vote.
No, I agree. I support this. It just doesn't make sense how in one instance you want to go for a grant and the other you don't. And we never get the full grant, which is why you have to fundraise so heavily. And
We have to make your priorities as a
Guys, I'm going to keep us on task here. I don't want to relitigate the previous item. We're discussing ordinance 484.
Well, that was my point. You're going to have to pay for the Mary Yarley Bridge to some extent, the shortfall that you can't fundraise. And we should all be realistic about that, which I'm okay with.
All right, thank you. Do we have any further comments from council on the ordinance related to the general obligation note? Are there any additional comments, questions from the public? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of adoption of ordinance number 484, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right, hearing none, the motion carries 7-0. And then, Mr. Klosser, do we need additional motion on actions related to closing the note, or is the ordinance sufficient?
The ordinance covers all of those issues, so we'll proceed to work with the bank for a closing. We have to apply to the state for approval, and I would anticipate a closing sometime in August.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Do you have additional items on your report?
I do not, sir. That's it.
All right, thank you. Moving on, Mayor's report is the next item. As I mentioned, Mayor Harding did reach out before the meeting to indicate he had some last minute business come up and would not be able to attend. So with that, we will move on to council member reports, and we'll begin with Mr. Barry.
No report.
Mr. Ross.
Public Works met earlier, but pretty much everything got covered in the engineer's report. So nothing really new to report.
Ms. Siegel-Morris.
Nothing to report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I also have no report this evening. Ms. Thompson.
No report.
We're moving along quickly. Mr. McCann.
No report.
Finally, Mr. Finer.
No report.
I have a question for Mr. Finer. Was Akvile's application also for Parks and Recreation, and were you recommending her for that as well? Because we didn't vote on that.
I was recommending her for yes, Parks and Recreation. That's correct. Wait, let me just.
She applied for 2, and we voted in the consent agenda to appoint her to the HRC, but not to Parks and Rec. Oh, you're muted.
Hang on one second. Let me get my my paperwork up for that.
And I'm looking back too. I don't know if that was just my mistake or what was in the packet.
She checked both on her
She
application.
she applied for two. She applied for Human Relations and Park and Rec. I think we recommended her for Parks and Rec because my recollection is that she had I think we made a note of that on the form. Let me just get the form up and I'll be with you in a moment.
Yeah, you know what, I beat you to it. It does say Parks and Rec, so I called it out incorrectly at the beginning of the meeting. So I guess we could just do a motion to,
I must have missed that. Sorry about that.
but we can just do a motion to correct that.
Is there a reason that you don't want to recommend her for the Human Relations Commission as well?
Because we had somebody else that we recommended for that one.
And how many people will there be active? Isn't, because one person's term has expired at this point, hasn't it?
We have 2 vacancies on HRC.
Yeah.
So what was not clear, maybe it wasn't clear to me, is that she was available to serve on 2 committees. But I have no problem with recommending her for 2 committees. She was a strong applicant.
Okay.
So if
And I
that's
think we
what
could
she
use her.
desires and there's space on both committees, then absolutely we recommend her for both.
Yeah, I think we actually do need an extra, at least a person on the HRC right now. Although it's
Yeah,
not.
I mean, but my sense from the interview is that she was readily available, but it wasn't clear that she was applying for both to be doing both simultaneously. But I fully support that if she's on board with it.
We just don't know if she's on board with it. Bucky, do we have to rescind the whole consent agenda to change that one, or?
I think someone could make a motion to essentially amend the prior approval of the consent agenda by, taking that issue out and dealing with that separately.
So, Uri, if you could just follow up with her offline, and if she's not okay with both, she could just submit a resignation to one or the other after the fact. That's probably the easiest way. So I'll make a motion to amend the consent agenda and pull out Akvile's application, Akvile Montfalate's application.
Second.
What?
Okay, so we have a motion to remove her application from the consent agenda earlier. All right, so if we pass that, I'm just working through this in my head. We'll then have to pass her appointment to one, or do we want to wait until next meeting till we're clear on what she wants to be appointed to?
I'm pretty clear she's okay with both, but I'm not 100. I would want to just check with her. So I think it's okay to appoint her and then she could resign from one if that was too much. Then it's done.
Do you want to do that instead?
That's what I thought I was doing, but.
I see no harm in that. I mean.
So I was amending the consent agenda to remove her application so that we could vote on that separately, and I was going to add Parks and Rec to that motion. Or Mr. Klosser, you can just make the motion and I'll parrot whatever you say.
That sounds like that will work.
All right, let's do that. So the motion was made, and I think Mr. Feiner seconded it. So just to recap, it's to pull Ms. Akvile's application from the consent agenda, and then additionally appoint her to the Parks and Rec Board in addition to the HRC. Is there any discussion on that item? All right, hearing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, it carries 7-0. And Mr. Feiner, I guess just follow up with her offline, and if she doesn't want to do both, she can, we can make sure that she's only needs to be on one. All right, so we're at the very end of reports. Any questions on any reports? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to discussion items. Are there, actually, you know what, I'm sorry, I saw Ms. Perlmutter's hand went up, so go ahead before we move on.
Just something real quick. It was on the borough manager's report. When I heard they're cleaning out the closet with the old files, and I know that's not an easy job. I was just wondering if you're scanning things in, like sometimes there's things, really some historic things that can be in these closets. And I was just wondering if it's just being looked at kind of carefully, and being certain things being scanned in, because I've been at meetings where somebody will come in with a folder from 30 years ago and it's really important.
Well, we haven't gotten rid of anything yet, and we're still going through the files, and we have a list of stuff of how long we have to keep everything, and we're not throwing out files. There's nothing that's going to be thrown out that's, or shredded, I should say, shredded, because we're going to shred them. Nothing, we're being very close with what we need to do.
Okay. So you're not scanning anything in then? You're just.
We haven't even started that. We're just going.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We're just going through files. We haven't started anything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And as mentioned before, records destruction is an item that would come before council. So there will be plenty of time before anything disappears forever. All right, next up on the agenda is discussion items. So at this time, if any council member would like to bring something up for sort of long-term planning purposes, please chime in. All right, and hearing none there, we'll move on to other business. Mr. McCann, it looks like you have a lot line change for us tonight.
I think you're muted, John.
There we go.
Sorry. Yeah, so parcel located at 66 North Main and 70 North Main Street in Yardley. I'll make a motion to approve the plan put forward.
Second.
Motion was made by Mr. McCann, seconded by Ms. Thompson to approve the lot line change between 66 and 70 North Main Street. Are there any discussion or questions from council? Discussion or questions from the public? Hearing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries 7-0. That concludes our agenda business this evening. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, motion is made by Ms. Thompson, seconded by Mr. Ross. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carries. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Good
Night.
night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.